One day in late February, I was tossing and turning. I slept like crap the night before. I laid in bed at 2 p.m. trying desperately to have a nap before it got too late in the day. And for some reason, I remembered a trailer I saw during a Sony State of Play in 2020 for a visual novel called Goodbye Volcano High. I remember thinking it looked pretty stylish, had an animated trailer that bled teenage angst. It gave Life is Strange meets Night in the Woods vibes, and I love both those games. So, while I wasn't sure I was going to break the bank on a PS5 for the sake of getting in its status as a timed exclusive, I thought that Goodbye Volcano High sounded like the kind of thing I'd really enjoy if it managed to stick the landing, and so I kept it in a far-flung corner in the back of my mind ever since. I'd sort of peck at news regarding it every couple of months. I admit, I never really did anything beyond surface-level insight into its release date, even after it passed its promised date of 2021. I had bigger fish to fry, you know? But that day, where I tossed and turned, that succeeded a night where I slept like crap, I decided to watch the trailer for the first time in forever. And then I decided to read the comments section. And it's just non-stop vitriol. Like, holy shit, guys, I know a queer visual novel with dinosaur high school protagonists is a pretty huge swing. But Christ almighty, I think the people posting these comments had these characters break into their bedrooms at night and take huge dinosaur dumps on their chests while they slept. Now, I'm no furry or nothing, and I don't even mean that in a coy Saberspark kind of way either. It's not really my cup of joe. And I never really had much in the way of a dinosaur phase. As a kid, I was kind of more about animals that didn't die out millions of years before I was born. So, with the confession that I'm not a furry and I'm not hella into dinosaurs, maybe my opinion here is just piss in the wind. But as far as designs go, I don't see how these characters are anything less than good. A little bit deviant artish, perhaps, but I think that lends them a bit of an earnest charm. It just seems like a lot, considering we have, by all accounts, very limited insight about the game. But it was at least helpful in the respect the critical reception of this game did make me wonder if it was instrumental in why I haven't heard any news about it. So I stopped pecking and I started digging. I had found out that it had been delayed to 2022 without my knowledge, and then I would later discover to 2023. Game development has suffered in the wake of COVID-19, much more so for smaller studios, and between the pandemic and the communication snafus it likely caused for co-op, critical response to the initial trailer, key team members being ousted and narrative reboots being implemented, it's caused the perfect storm for its delay. As of December of 2022, we can intuit that it's a Choices Matter game set at the backdrop of a major cataclysm with rhythm game elements. But even with a new trailer released after roughly a year and a half of radio silence on the subject that's announced to release for summer of 2023, we're still at a bit of a loss for details. And that silence has caused some to slake their thirst for more on an unofficial project. Enter V, a board of 4chan. Be my guest anyway, I would certainly prefer not to. But to hear TV Tropes, a site I like only a margin more tell it, mockery of Goodbye Volcano High on V eventually gave way to genuine passion and discussion. Much to the surprise of the whole board before a select few anonymous game developers and artists, a parody version of Goodbye Volcano High was written and released, almost a year to the date of the first official trailer. That parody is called Snoot Game, and it's the primary subject of my discussion today. I first heard about Snoot Game in the comments section of Goodbye Volcano High's official trailer, with one commentator implying that 4chan beat Goodbye Volcano High's studio co-op to the punch with something better. Now, I think to say that would be jumping the gun a bit. After all, we haven't yet seen the whole of what co-op is bringing to the table. But I would be lying if I said that a parody visual novel developed by 4chan that gives way to surprising emotional drama in its latter half didn't intrigue me a little. I'm not sure I'd care to do a deep dive into every work, original or parody, that 4chan has exported, but I do know that they're at least batting 1 for 1 in terms of visual novel projects. I may have implied it earlier, but let me outright state, visual novels are my shit. But is Snoot Game truly goated with the sauce? Yeah it is. So Snoot Game is good, really good. I'm very impressed. I just finished 100%ing it. I got all the endings and I finished all the bonus content, and I find myself with that sort of emotional emptiness that one only gets when there's no juice left to squeeze out of something one truly loves. Except that isn't entirely true, because now I'm going to stand behind my podium and try to explore my thoughts on it. Beyond Snoot Game as an unexpected classic, I'm not really going into this with any kind of thesis statement, so I'm just going to try to find it as I go. I mentioned earlier that Snoot Game is a parody, and on a strictly mechanical level that's true, but having played it, I think it's more apparent that Snoot Game is a love letter to Goodbye Volcano High. It still throws some friendly potshots at times, and you'll see a couple smears of 4chan's paint at others, but I think it otherwise plays as a celebration of Goodbye Volcano High's character, ambition, and spirit. It's coming from a very genuine and occasionally very raw place, and I'd be honored to try to take you there. But before I do, I think it's important to get some things out of the way. Snoot Game has some depictions and descriptions of things that some people would find objectionable, including bullying, misgendering, routine use of ableist slurs, self-harm, and in far and away the worst bad ending, school gun violence. This ending is also one that you have to play if you want to get all the bonus chapters. We should acknowledge that this is a work from 4chan. It may not be tailor-made or the most accommodating for people outside of its specific strata, or for people who are uninitiated to its brand of more colorful online discussion. I'm playing the latest and last patch of the game, which includes bonus chapters that unlock after the completion of the different endings, as well as finished CGs and updated character art and animations. Anyone who downloads this free visual novel in the time since I have will be starting with this version. But I think that if you completed the game in its functionally incomplete state and left it at that, it would be more than worth your while to give it another go. I'm going to be starting my analysis proper by giving a summary of the first act of the game for those uninitiated. Out of respect for Fang's identity and preferences in the first act of the story, I will be using they-them pronouns when referring to them in the following section. So you can consider this formal indication that you don't need to point out to me in the comments that some of the characters, and indeed the narration, refer to Fang with feminine pronouns. You can also spare yourself the trouble of informing me of later plot developments. I'm wildly aware. It may have been suggested by the fact that I, made a video about it, but I've covered this visual novel snoot to tail, alright? Unlike some people. Are we clear? Cool. Now that we got the housekeeping out of the way, let's get started with that summary. I know there's probably a couple of people out there that are curious about this game, but want to get a picture of what they're in for. This section's for you, so come scooch a little bit closer. If you played this game before or just want to get into the analysis part of this video, though, you can skip to this timestamp here. If everyone's quite ready, let's get started. Our protagonist is a young man named Anon, and I think the first choice we're presented with in this game does a pretty solid job of informing us of the kind of person we're dealing with here. He's been transferred to Volcano High after being shipped out to a rundown apartment to complete the year by his dad, who's at a loss at how to deal with him. It's either college or the service after graduation, and Pops is none too concerned which. But it's all good, as our dear Anon is just as concerned about his schooling, dedicating himself full-time to the art of slipping under the radar as much as possible, after having to transfer from his old school due to an undisclosed incident 6 months ago. He makes a connection with local punk Fang right away, mutual animosity. Needing to decompress from seeing so many people congregate, himself the only human around, he sits on a derelict bench, and after contemplating the life choices that brought him to this point, he falls flat in his ass and into the orbit of Naomi and Naser, student council president and star athlete respectively, and Volcano High's it couple. They're here to be the welcome wagon for Anon, but Naser is quick to excuse himself. The conversation quickly turns awkward when Naomi asks why Anon transferred here, and he gets roped into applying for financial assistance, during which we become privy to the degree of social anxiety that he has, hearing alarm bells every time someone makes physical contact with him. In this case, Naomi taking him by the hand to meet Principal Spears, and then to homeroom when Spears is unavailable. The homeroom teacher, Mr. Suki, asks Anon to introduce himself, and he freezes up. Attempting to be helpful, Naomi asks about his old school, which only makes the matter worse. Turns out pretty much everyone's ignoring him anyway, a trend that continues all morning long. The day passes on with everyone meeting Anon's arrival with indifference, and we're taken to a concert put on by Naser's sibling. Anon waffled on whether or not he'd come, but man after my own heart is ultimately lured by the promise of free food. Anon and Naser talk about Naser's sibling, Fang, and we meet Principal Spears for the first time. He greets Anon and tells him to come to his office in the morning to do paperwork. Anon grabs some pizza as he observes the rest of the crowd, who seem unhappy at best about being there. Anon informs Naser of this when he comes to check on the band, and he seems pretty pissed, to say the least. Naser is forced to excuse himself after Fang informs him that he'll ruin the show. He asks Anon not to hold it against Fang and that they're a lovely person once you get to know them. And Anon proceeds to ask why he just murdered the English language in cold blood. He's one of those types. The lights dim and the curtains are drawn, and we find out that we have a front row seat to the shit show. The band begins to play and the crowd begins to jeer, and on screen we see insults hurled at the band that seem not too far from the comments underneath the Goodbye Volcano High trailer. Anon joins in on the laughter, and as he's about to leave, he's confronted by Spears, who tells him that he expects Anon to be mature about the situation, and he introduces us to a key theme of this story, that you are not the only person in the world. Anon takes his pizza in hand and leaves, ruminating on Spears' lesson. He reflects on his relationship with Naser and worries about how his reaction to the concert may affect it as we cut to the next day. The first choice of consequence of the storyline follows, having to choose between clearing the air with Naser about the concert or meeting Principal Spears about the paperwork he mentioned. Now, I can't speak for any of you, but as someone who's warming up to this being alive thing and a card-carrying possessor of common sense, I feel less comfortable pissing off Spears than I do Naser, so we're picking him. It's a movable feast of introductions and establishing moments as we run into Reed, the drummer in Fang's band, who shows us to Spears' office. We also see Naomi, who's having an argument with Trish, another member of Fang's band, about selling merchandise on school property. When we eventually get into Spears' office, he applauds Anon for being early and informs us that he's not here to lecture us, but to facilitate the process of getting financial support. Discreetly sneaking off after witnessing Trish beat up someone who laughed at the concert, Anon runs into Naser and Reed, but Anon doesn't have a chance to talk to Naser before he has to go to homeroom. We get some insight into Anon as he scans a trophy case and remarks on one awarded for anti-bullying efforts. He has lunch with Naser and Naomi today, and Naser points out that Fang stayed home at school, left feeling terrible about the events of the concert. Anon resolves that he'd probably have to avoid Naser if he found out about his own role in the concert fiasco. We cut to 2 days later, and Anon feels relatively assured that he's succeeding at remaining invisible before he runs into Naomi, who takes him by the hand once more to see the school's award-winning gardens. But she seems a bit distracted. We can choose between speaking up or staying quiet, but Naomi, ever the sharer, reveals regardless that she's pretty concerned about Naser and the amount of concern he's sharing over Fang. Anon turns into the school and runs into Fang for the first time, and reflects on his thoughts on Naomi, finding her saccharine and artificial. He has a brief conversation with Fang, who asks if he's seen Trish and Reed before they make an exit. He appeals to a Jurassic god to make Naomi miss homeroom, which I think is a huge indicator that he doesn't know all that much about her. Fang and Anon are partnered in their science class, and Anon misgenders Fang as the teacher comes to check on the pair. Fang corrects him, informing him that they're non-binary, and they get ready to unload a practice speech on him before the teacher urges Fang to go outside, telling Anon to forgive them as he points out they're experiencing issues. We see Anon contemplating why Fang would identify as non-binary when they wear clothes that are traditionally more femme-presenting, but he ultimately reasons he should try to play nice. It's likely that due to their social standing they'll be working together more often. He apologizes for the reaction Fang got to their band, conveniently leaving out that he was there too. Anon has math with Reed and Trish and Carl, Bertan, and Anna Deluski. These fucking cameos, man. We find out that Fang informed Trish of Anon's indiscretions in science class, but appreciates that Anon apologized. She introduces herself and Reed as Fang's best friends, and Trish talks about the band they're all in as Anon attempts to dodge any implication that he was there that day. As Anon tries to squirm himself out of the conversation, Trish tells Anon that Fang found something about themselves that makes them happy, and that they don't need anything in their life that makes them hurt or confused, telling him not to upset Fang. Protective. Invested. Reed does the homework for Anon. They make friends, and Anon immediately dips, taking the wrong backpack with him. He debates turning the drug paraphernalia that Reed has stowed in his backpack with him, but ultimately he finds Reed to make the switch, and lies when pressed that he keeps his lunch card in his backpack. Realizing that he's both the new kid and that he needs financial assistance, Reed encourages Anon to sit with him in the band at lunch, offering to be our first friend. Reed also tells him not to worry about Trish, and as the entire band gathers to contemplate our destitution, we eventually find ourselves with new lunchmates. Reed also offers you a choice to check out a link on YouTube at this point, and if you take him up on it, it opens up a browser and takes you to the trailer for Goodbye Volcano High. It's very cute. Reed subjects you to a recording of the band practicing, and Anon impresses them all with his knowledge. Reed suggests coming along to a concert, but they all scurry off at the sight of Naser and Naomi. After a short talk, Naomi expresses how pleased she is that Anon's making new friends, and suggests that Anon should try to become better friends with Fang in particular. A week passes and Anon gets the right answers in his math work from Reed, an act that leads to Anon talking to him and Trish. Trish indicates Fang's been talking about him, and lectures him about leaving Fang alone, having heard about experiments Anon has done with railguns. Fortunately for Anon, Reed, ever the bro, manages to derail Trish's attention in his own unique way. When Anon eats lunch with Naser and Naomi later, Naomi's better half faints from exhaustion, tapped out between student council obligations and worries about Fang, forcing Naomi and Anon to lead him to the nurse's office. Anon slams into a student named Stella on his way back, who dabbles in tarot, informing him that he has choices to make. He makes it to music class just in time for a free period. He considers spending the day shitposting, and he realizes that he shares a music class with Fang. He dreads seeing Fang with a guitar, but is shocked to see they're very talented. He watches them play, and they get to talking about guitar. Turns out Trish and Reed outvoted Fang when it came to their instrument setup, which is why they play another bass instead of a guitar proper. After Anon contests that they sound better with a guitar, almost letting slip that he was at the concert in the process, Fang manages to invite him to a rehearsal, betting him that he's wrong and that they sound better on bass. Trish is pissed to see him there, but Fang explains the situation and the three begin to play. They stink, but Fang's about to take up their guitar. Anon debates stepping in when Trish begins to take issue with it, a matter in which you're given a level of choice. We're going to step up for Fang, though, and speak up. Trish eventually relents, and they actually sound very nice. The members of Worm Drama take another vote on their instrument composition, and the Yeas have it, Fang's on guitar. Just as Anon is about to take his leave, Fang asks Anon to stay at the rehearsals, but Anon tries to get out of staying, a matter he only barely succeeds in. Anon goes through class unencumbered by anything, and Naomi and Naser approach him, with Naomi revealing that she's memorized Anon's schedule. Anon tries to squeeze out of eating lunch with them, and both of them seem pretty supportive of his lie about eating lunch with Fang. He ends up going to the auditorium to try his luck with Fang anyway, and he finds them there with the rest of Worm Drama. Anon and Fang end up bonding over their mutual disdain for Naomi, causing Fang to ignore Trish momentarily. Trish has designed mock-up posters for the band, and it looks as though her graphic design skills are about on par with her bass playing. Fang and Anon head to music together after lunch, and they chat about their taste in music, and they have an exchange that's very cute about Fang's preference in Britpunk. In class, Anon has a hard time with work, and he debates trying to ask Fang for help. We're going to ask when we're given the option. Fang seems to be willing to help us out. Reed also shows up, as he's apparently the school mascot. Fang reveals that they've been into music since pre-K, starting with piano their grandma played. They talk for a while, and Fang decides to ask Anon why he left his old school, and he and Fang talk about their relationships with making new friends. They're both antisocial people, but Fang contests the idea that Anon isn't good at making friends, but that they'll miss him when he leaves to go make his own. Anon, paranoid that Trish knows the truth about his transfer and told Fang, breaks into their phone and reads their messages to Trish. Fang confides in Trish about a pretty major depressive episode shortly after the concert, and Anon is remorseful and disgusted with himself about what he just did. Fang returns and they fill in the sheet together, with Anon pointing out that they're an even better teacher than Mr. Jinga. Fang offers to help again if needed before the bell rings before the end of class. 2 days have passed, and Anon is still dealing with the guilt. It's Saturday now, and he's heading to school for detention, beautification duty at the campus. Fang is there too, with Stella, the Stegosaurus student Anon ran into before. We also meet Rosa, the head of the gardening club, before Spears calls them all out to the front. Anon and Fang decide to throw in their lot together, however begrudgingly. Fang points out how Anon seems milquetoast around other people, and Anon begins to elaborate more on his feelings towards making new friends. After Rosa chews them out for Anon getting too acquainted with her flower bed, they talk about Anon's opinion that some people won't amount to anything, an expression he lifted from Fang's notes to Trish. Anon explains that smart people are a dying breed because he's 17 years old. Fang agrees, explaining that it may be a consequence of counterculture opinion, and that they have an on-the-fence opinion of Reed. Anon actually questions them on this, and Fang says that hanging out with them is better than being alone. And at long last, Anon finally reveals himself. He walked into the auditorium and laughed his way out. You can come clean about this fact with Fang or joke about it. But we're going to be open about the fact that Naser invited us under the premise of free food, and Anon points out that he didn't come clean about it because he saw Trish beating people up. Fang runs away, but Anon trips on the gardening tools upon a different flower bed. He gets chewed out by Rosa again, only being pacified by Stella, who's able to talk some sense into Rosa and Anon, pointing out that if you can't share someone's pain, you can never truly understand them. Quoting Naruto, of all things. Anon runs into Fang in a faculty lot, debating breaking into a car. He's able to reason that Fang is better than this, and they run when a teacher tries to pursue them. They escape into the locked school, and Anon confesses that he was at the concert and made fun of Fang, unaware that he would become their friend. Anon reasons with himself that he could just leave Fang alone when they run off. The easy life he wants is just within grasp. So why does he feel so empty? Anon's found by Rosa and Stella, and after a brief discussion they set upon helping Rosa plant flowers. Spears thanks everyone for showing up and dismisses them, with Anon staying behind for penance. Rosa, however, makes everyone mole poblano for lunch. Anon reasons that Stella and Rosa are decent enough people, but questions Stella on why she loves tarot and quoting video games. Turns out it's just the stuff she likes. How nice it must be. Fang, however, sticks around through Anon's extra hours and decides to talk to him. They clarify that they're more upset that Anon kept it from them after all this time. They leave the gardening club as friends, and Anon leaves with his body sore but his spirit soaring. He finds himself at a crossroads, getting closer to Fang and eschewing his connections with Naser and Naomi in favor of Reed and Fang, but he's aware that Trish still doesn't like him. Anon has a talk with Reed as he fixes the projector ahead of a school assembly, and Trish mentions that something's wrong with Fang, accusing Anon of doing something to them. And Anon makes a note to talk to Fang, while almost revealing his interest in anime to Trish and Reed while talking about the Count of Monte Cristo. Anon goes into music class to find that Fang has skipped, and that they haven't seen the messages that he sent them. Anon dekes out of music class under the pretense that he needs to go to the bathroom, With Mr. Jingo's bathroom pass, a functional guitar in hand, he rushes to find Fang, figuring out where they are by looking out the window and seeing their white feathers falling down from the roof. Anon has a talk with Fang there, having inadvertently locked both of them out of the building. Fang is preening their wings, but from the look of all the blood, we can intuit that they might just be exploiting our lack of knowledge about pterosaur people. You can lead the conversation or you can let Fang talk. They open up about their insecurities, about never making anything of themselves, or anything worthwhile, about how their parents likely see them as a lost cause, wondering why Naser can breeze through his life as the ace student. You're given multiple opportunities to interrupt Fang while they talk, and if you wait just long enough, they tell you an interesting story about Naser. Anon tells Fang that they're not a burden to him, suggests they step out of their comfort zone more often, and that they should try being nicer to Naser. Fang asks for his support, and Anon assures them that they don't have to do it alone. With that promise made, Fang takes Anon's bathroom pass and begins to play a song, referencing the words Goodbye Volcano High as they sing. Anon takes Fang's hand to lift them up off the ground, and he's shocked to find that the alarms in his head that go off when he makes physical contact with someone are silent. It feels comfortable, natural. Fang accidentally pushes their muzzle into his face when he lifts them. Fang asks Anon why he doesn't just quit music since it's an elective, and he says that he needs to maintain his GPA and that he kind of likes it, and Fang elects to help him. At that moment, Principal Spears kicks the door off its hinges and through the suicide fence around the roof. Spears reprimands them and orders Anon to go to class and Fang to go to the nurse's office, and they part ways with a mutual understanding point. Anon wonders about the direction of his life, and the drama, and the pleasant feeling he feels when he thinks about Fang, and wonders for the first time if he might like them. That seems like a pretty good place to end things as far as a recap of Act 1 goes. I took my sweet time with my first playthrough of this game, and this covers give or take about 3 hours into the main story. But believe me when I say that it's really only the beginning, and I believe that you should try to focus on getting the middle and end parts done on your own. So if any of what you've seen or heard appeals, I strongly recommend that you download and play Snoot Game before you continue on with this video. Because if I didn't spoil you before, and don't I always, I'm definitely going to start in the subsequent sections of this video. So go, run along now, download and play Snoot Game, you little scamp. Once Daddy's finished his drinky poo, we'll continue on. Before we dig a little deeper into the characters of the game, I wanted to take a moment to talk about some of the finer details of it, because I think some of them are worth discussing. I'd like to start with a brief acknowledgement of the game's save function. I know some people might think of a visual novel and not see a type of game that necessitates quality of life details in its design, but I found Snoot Game interesting because I think it did that very well. You have a more than serviceable 54 save slots in total. There's the option to quick save, and the game has autosaves during key story beats. I thought that was really cool. If you're in a bit of a hurry and you want to see if one choice you made could have changed the ending for you, you have the capacity to figure that out for sure. Pretty sweet. As I mentioned earlier, the latest and last update for this game included bonus chapters that unlock after the completion of the different endings. There are 10 of them in total. There are no choices to make in any of them, and with the exception of a couple of multi-part stories, they're all self-contained narratives, ranging in complexity from Anon bonding with the men of the Aaron family over a round of bowling, to Naomi navigating her feelings towards her post-game breakup with Naser with the help of an unlikely source. I first played this game long after the last update happened, so I can't speak for how the game played before that point, but I would argue this edition works in the game's favor. I said earlier that you couldn't 100% clear the game without getting all the bonus scenes by clearing all the endings. But just to pull an Uno reverse on myself, this is a visual novel. There are no leaderboards or achievements for this game, so you can afford to take it at your own pace. And although I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice in doing so, if you want to spare yourself the pain of the bad endings, there's nothing stopping you from just getting the good or the true ending and just leaving it at that. But I'm glad that they included the bonus content, because as I'm going to expand upon shortly, I like the characters in this game a lot. I think they were all very well written, and most with compelling internal conflict. The fact that this game affords you optional opportunities to spend even just a little more time with them, and to see how they handle life between the events of Volcano High's prom and the fast forward and the true ending is very welcome, and nothing but a good thing in my opinion. It's a solid intrinsic reward for the player's curiosity of how their choices affects their journey. If you need that part again in plain English, it's the way the game rewards you if you're given a shit, and I think the fact that it does it all is worthy of note, and of praise. Snoot Game made some changes to some of the characters' designs in order to differentiate them from their inspirations, and to facilitate a transition to a two-dimensional plane. I stand by my statement that the original designs for these characters are not inherently bad, but I do believe the changes that were implemented here were done with a gentle touch that I think helped to refine them. Take Reed, for example. We don't know a lot about Reed in Goodbye Volcano High. Dude doesn't even have a profile to describe him on the website. but I think the changes made to his design in Snoot Game make him stand out on his own. Snoot Game's take on the character is a shorter tail, a broader, burlier physique, smaller pupils, shaggier hair, and thicker eyelashes. It's a collection of subtle details, but just because they're there, you could probably take one look at him and intuit that he's laid back and a bit of a burnout, even if I had told you nothing at all about the character. And I think that's a litmus test for any good character design. The small details contribute to a larger conversation, and I think Goodbye Volcano High's take on the character is kind of quiet by comparison. Now, I try to go into just about everything with an open mind, but I'll be the first to confess that I went into Snoot Game incredibly skeptical. That being said, I was taken with the soundtrack from the jump. Hearing that first drop of Fang's de facto theme, that monochromatic weirdo in the opening minutes of the game, was one of the main things that shook my faith in my preconceived notion that playing Snoot Game was going to be a profoundly negative experience. I remark in my footage that I'm a sucker for synths, and indeed I is. However, the soundtrack for this game runs in a variety of different directions, from the synth-heavy, to more frenetic rock, to the melancholic jazz number, Skin Rose Soul, that sort of serves as Anon's theme. There are those who would criticize the soundtrack for being inconsistent, not having a solid enough narrative storyline, but I would object to the latter. The soundtrack is very eclectic, yes, but I would argue this acts in service of the narrative. You never really know what you're going to get next, and I think that sensation captures the unique madness of being young and in love very effectively. All of it is pretty great. I think that most of the tracks are moody enough to sell the atmosphere of a burgeoning romance between two outcasts in their senior year of high school very well, but there's also a couple of more silly songs in there just to keep you on your toes. For example, I got a big laugh out of seeing that Principal Spears' theme song, a piece that uses a combination of bells and bongos to sell a jungle atmosphere that would make Donkey Kong feel at home, is called, and I shit you not, We Just Turned On the Microphone in Our Programmer's House. It's so fucking beautiful. I think the worst aspect of anonymous projects of this nature is that beyond a list of anonymous names, I'm never sure who to thank, credit, or appreciate for the quality of work they invested in it. So, if you were involved in Snoot Game on any level and you're watching this right now, I just wanted to take a sec to say it's a slam dunk, lads. Capital work. I find myself so impressed, in fact, that it's been a recurring thought of mine why there hasn't been more attention drawn to Snoot Game as a creative effort. In fact, I wasn't able to find any media publications about it at all. Zero. None whatsoever. Alright, let's get this shit out of the way. I was divided on whether or not I'd include a segment discussing an article recently published by Kotaku about Snoot Game, but I ultimately decided that since this article might be the most meaningful exposure some people have to the game, it was my responsibility to include a response to it. I repudiate all forms of harassment, and the idea that co-op has faced harassment because they're telling a story with a queer character at the center of its narrative doesn't, unfortunately, take a huge stretch of my imagination, so I'm not going to speak on that. However, I think that the article does some things to stretch the truth. It alleges that Snoot Game used modified and repurposed art assets from the original game, and I think that this is phrased incredibly disingenuously. I think it's almost guaranteed that Cavemanon used promotional material of the characters to create a color palette for their redesigns, but the phrase used modified and repurposed art assets suggests that Cavemanon games stole assets from co-op. It's not a lie because creating a palette from promotional material is, after a fashion, repurposing art assets, but it's not exactly the truth because it's implying something and letting people's biases do the heavy lifting. I don't have any love for 4chan as a larger machine either, but this verbiage is blatantly manipulative. And that's egregious enough, but overall, a lot of this article reads like it was penned by someone who just read a plot synopsis or a TV tropes page and decided to jot something down. And God knows it wouldn't be the first time a games journalist reported negatively on a game without really playing it. But I mean, come on. I always thought that this school of journalism at least was supposed to be ethical. And also, while we're on the subject of Kotaku, remember those narrative reboots to Goodbye Volcano High I mentioned earlier? Well, I'm sure that decision was made in no small part due to the ousting of the former lead writer on the project due to some dubious stuff she published on Kotaku in 2019. I feel like I've divested enough time and attention into the topic of this article, so I'm not going to go into further detail. But given that something published on Kotaku is indirectly responsible for Goodbye Volcano High's delay, I think the hope of ameliorating potential bad blood between it and co-op would have been a motive for Kotaku to smear Snoot Game, especially since this article was published in November of 2022, and everyone was under the impression that Goodbye Volcano High would be released before the end of the year. But, you know, that's just a theory. Game theory. So fucking dumb. Oh, right. While we're on the subject of games, let's go back to actually talking about one, right? The first time I played this game, I opted to do choices as I would make them. A sort of follow my heart run, if you will. It's a big part of the reason why visual novels and similar decision-based story games appeal to me so much. I guess I like the idea of a narrative and its resolution being a patchwork of my own choices. It's a little empowering, you know? But upon further playthroughs, I notice a unique characteristic about Snoot Game, namely that your choices aren't in and of themselves consequential to the actual plot. There are several choices you can make that may shift some things around or just the timing of certain things, but for the most part, the story up until this point and up until the finale at and after Volcano High's prom plays pretty much the same across most playthroughs. And that's not to say that your choices don't matter or that they're just window dressing to serve an entirely railroaded plot. I think it's an interesting twist because while the story marches forward, at times seemingly indifferent to your input, Fang and Anon are certainly not. Your choices impact the two of them more than anything else, and how much they've come to grow as a couple and as individual people, or how much they didn't, will be the difference between whether you're getting the good or the bad endings. And I think that's a pretty novel system. It's not one I'm really used to, and I didn't really find a broader issue with it since the plot that you're given and the characters you interact with are very charming and compelling. So let's talk about those characters a bit. I'd like to speak more about Anon and Fang, but I think they've had a decent amount of spotlight so far, so we'll focus our attention on the first couple of people we met for now. Those being... Naser and Naomi are Anon's liaisons in Volcano High at the beginning of the story. His only real acquaintances amidst a student body that's largely indifferent to his presence. A star athlete and the student government president respectively, they're pretty high in the pecking order of the school. But I think one thing that really makes both these characters sizzle is the tangible weight of the expectations thrust upon them. As far as we get to see in the baseline story, Naser struggles with this the most. He holds himself up to pretty impossible standards, and he's not alone in that. We later get to meet his and Fang's parents, and to hear him tell it, he bears the brunt of all their hopes for the family because they've functionally given up on Fang becoming a productive member of society. All this on top of trying to ensure Fang isn't ostracized at school, trying to prove his parents are wrong about his sibling, and only earning Fang's ire along the way for his efforts. He's seen struggling with this multiple times, from falling asleep mid-conversation because of overworking himself, to having breakdowns and fits of rage because he's entombed by the weight of everything he has to deal with. My heart bleeds for the guy, because I was that guy not long ago. It can be pretty hard to watch. Naomi shares my opinion on this much, and resorts to fairly underhanded tactics in order to take the onus of Fang's success off of him. We see the full scope of this later on when Anon clues into the fact that she's been subtly manipulating him for most of the game into pursuing a friendship and a relationship with Fang. A master stroke made with the intention of pawning the responsibility of Fang's well-being onto someone other than her boyfriend. Naomi is not especially well liked by the cast that we see and interact with, and I can see why. She's incredibly overbearing, she has a proven manipulative streak, her saccharine nature is an elaborate fabrication designed to hide a maelstrom of neuroses born from her perfectionism. In summary, she's a bit of a schmoll.
I see some confusion among the members, so let me just clarify. A schmoll is a dude with a good heart who kind of sucks.
The bonus chapters even reveal that Naomi was selected to be student council president because the election itself was met with indifference from candidates and voters alike. Anon is not especially crazy about Naomi even before he clues into her true intentions. It's a big part of the reason why Fang and he initially bond. So the narrative with him at the helm doesn't do a whole lot of heavy lifting to make her a sympathetic character, but they did at least try in a handful of bonus chapters that take place from her perspective, including one where Naser breaks up with her after the true ending. We see her in the moments after she gets instated into student government, having doubts about whether she can do the job she's been chosen for, doubts about whether she's worthy, both for the position and about being Naser's girlfriend, when she sees a love note on her desk. The reveal of deep-seated issues with self-esteem. The bonus chapters centered on her all indicate that being Naser's partner, being the perfect girlfriend to him, is a big part of her self-worth. And maybe I'm just a bleeding heart, but seeing that get dismantled before our eyes is hard not to feel some kind of way about. I think Naser and Naomi are a really well-written pair, who, all too similar to people I know in real life, try desperately to help others, but can't really help themselves, who languish under expectations imposed from outside and from within. Self-imposed expectations sort of leads us into Trish, and to a lesser extent Reed. The pair are Fang's best friends and bandmates in Worm Drama, a band that's a source of derision amongst most of the student body due to their experimental sound, something largely brought about by Trish's insistence that they use two bass guitars. Trish is extremely dedicated to the band. One of the first scenes we see with her shows her throttling some poor slob in the hallway for laughing during Worm Drama's show. Trish is also very protective of Fang, and makes no small effort in threatening Anon if he harms or infringes on too much of their time. They're going to make it big, make something of themselves. Trish's attempt to get the band to glory manifests themselves in both overt and subtle ways. The rigidity of her ambition and devotion to the band is as absolute as it is asphyxiating, and the move she makes to ensure the trio remain unfractured makes her as close to an antagonist as the story really has. this being crystallized by her modifying a slideshow presentation in front of the whole school to reveal the reason Anon had transferred to Volcano High in the first place, being the victim of intense bullying after the full extent of his love for anime is revealed. Trish is also the subject of a few bonus chapters that explain more about her and her family life. The one big factor that separates Trish from Naomi is that the base game implicitly asks you to empathize with Trish. One major choice involves whether or not you modify a cable setup during a concert that she reassures you to set up properly in spite of looking haphazard. The cable choice is infamous. It catches out a lot of people, myself included, and I very well could have gotten the golden ending of my first run had I took her word as gospel and not fixed the setup. But I opted to, and indeed it was probably one of the fastest decisions I made during that playthrough, because, as I put it during my recording,
whatever, fuck Trish.
But I think it's a good demonstration of Snoot Game's primary thesis, even if it seems a little arbitrary and esoteric at first pass. You're not the only person in the world, after all. It's not a huge leap and bound then to assume that other people know what they're doing, even if they make the act of dealing with them an absolute fucking chore. Besides, Fang can't be friends with her for no reason, right? And as Anon becomes a member of their group, there's a bit of an onus to try to grease the wheels a bit. We actually have Reed to thank for that. He offers to be Anon's first friend at school, after he suggests Anon has lunch with the band when he finds out that he requires financial assistance from the school in order to eat. In a word, Reed is chill. He isn't opposed to Anon and Fang dating, and doesn't make himself a thorn in the side of that process. Not necessarily, anyways. He doesn't seem for the most part to share Trish's vision of Worm Drama's name in flashing lights either. He sees the band more as an avenue to jam and hang out with his best buds, which I think is a totally valid and very healthy way to look at the high school band thing, and he acts in service of that for better and worse. But mostly for the better. In fact, Reed seems to pull for Anon quite a lot. Whenever the player makes an ill-advised decision, Reed usually isn't too far behind to suggest the possibility that you could have acted differently. As far as barometers for progress go, it's an okay one, but I think I'd prefer a more subtle approach. This neatly weaves into the conceit of Stella, an otaku girl who, as far as I'm aware, is a character original to this game. She's very into tarot, and she wears her enthusiasm for anime on her sleeve. In a lot of respects, she's kind of like an anti-Anon. She's accommodating, kind, and a little bit awkward, but not enough to put her off of socializing with others. I wish that Stella and Anon had more scenes together. I think there was a lot of untapped potential in their dynamic. But I guess that's what we have quality fanfiction for. Stella gives you tarot readings from time to time when you run into her, and they're mostly before major choices, indicating to the player whether or not they're on track to get a good or a bad ending. I always found that to be kind of cool, because it feels like a less obtrusive way to suggest I mix up my approach than Reed chiding me for not asking Fang for help on the homework, or for fucking about with the cable setup. There's a bit more to interpret there. And yeah, I guess Reed has a vested interest in ensuring I'm not rocking the boat with his best friend. But there's a bit of a limit, right? I mean, if I wanted someone breathing down my neck about how I'm handling my relationship with Fang, I'd give Trish a call. Keep the change, bah. Anyway, Stella's best friend is Rosa, a character from Goodbye Volcano High not shown in the trailer, here stylized as a delightful Latina stereotype. You meet her when Principal Spears sentences you and Fang to campus beautification duty. She's the head of the gardening club, often goes on tangents in Spanish. There's a bit going on there. But I do like Rosa a lot. She and Stella are a lovely pair in scenes that they share, and she often helps to get Anon's and Naser's heads out of their asses during a couple of scenes. Rosa and Stella are friends of Anon's after some time, and it makes me really happy that Anon has reliable people to talk to that are unmoored by the internal conflicts and Worm Drama or the Aaron family. The pair are honest people, but they're never outright mean, which I think is a bit of a rarity. They're very unabashedly themselves. I think that's something that Anon could benefit from. Anon and Fang's relationship is the stud on which a lot of this game is hung, and as far as love stories go, I think it's quite well written. They're both people who are ensnared in a web of complex trauma and personal issues, and as a consequence of that, they lash out against the world. It's also, I think, part of what magnetizes them so thoroughly to each other. We experience the story through Anon, a terminally online misanthrope whose attempts to adopt a get-in and get-out approach to his remaining days at high school ultimately fail for the efforts of the people around him. Pawed out of his shell by Naomi and Naser, thrust into the orbit of Fang, Reed, and Trish through classes, cast as a social pariah by his school for reasons beyond his control, adopted as a quasi-son by a principal that sees his potential. I find Anon an entertaining character in that respect, kinda Arthur Dentian. I'm very endeared to characters with simple motivations that are hurled into discord because the world has no respect for their boundaries, and I think Anon fills that niche very well. He has a few edges that he would do well to sand down, but we have some degree of say in that. Your choices don't really shape much that go on in the story, but ultimately they offer you opportunities to double down on Anon's solipsism and apathy, or to try in earnest to connect with the people around him. I especially like that even after Anon breaks ground in his relationship with Fang, I think the game does a lot to try to dissuade you from bringing things to a codependent place. If you freeze out Trish or don't make an effort with Naser, it gradually begins to damage Fang's relationship with them too. Fang is a lot more easily influenced by the people they love than initial impressions might have you believe, which I think segues into something that I could tell after finishing the game I was going to have some difficulty articulating my position on. But please know that I'm going to try my best. So, true to Goodbye Volcano High's canon, Fang identifies as non-binary and uses they-them pronouns. Snoot Game's version of Fang identified as such for about a year prior to the beginning of Snoot Game, and the changes marked a turning point for their relationship with Naser and the rest of their family. In the two positive endings of the story, Fang prefers to use she/her pronouns and to start going by her old name, Lucy, a change even reflected in the text box when she speaks. People would have misgivings about that, about the correlation between the bad endings and Fang continuing to identify as a non-binary person, and I think they would be right to, divorced of, and hell, even bearing in mind the story's other contexts. I find myself in an interesting position when I think and talk about Snoot Game, because I feel the need to weigh how much I got out of the narrative and the game as a holistic experience against its more problematic elements, and I think that's a journey that will lead every player to a different destination. I exsanguinated that fella from Kotaku earlier, and I stand by my statements, but I'm not here to make the stand that Snoot Game is without fault or above criticism. Anon is undeniably more of a prick about the subject of Fang's gender than he needs to be. I wish he tried harder to learn and to meet Fang on their level about that. I think it's a small mercy that Fang has people in their life like Naser, Reed, and even one of their teachers that are making the effort, and that the narrative takes efforts to punish Anon for his inability or refusal to engage with people. I can also acknowledge that Anon's past trauma and present focus on survival probably inherently inhibits his capacity for understanding more abstract issues relating to people and identity. I think that particular brand of empathetic constipation would repel me from the idea of grabbing a pint with him and being his best buddy, but in that respect I think he's a very authentically written character. What I'm trying to say in a shell is that he gets quite an education during his time at Volcano High, and I found myself wishing he learned a little bit more. So it goes. I can wish all I like, but in the end we're left with the product that we have. I don't think I'm qualified to discuss issues relating to gender on a very in-depth basis, but I do think gender can be a complicated thing, that our relationship to it can change as we age, and that some people greatly benefit from more seriously contemplating their relationship to their gender. All that being said, I'm going to be blunt. Snoot Game isn't on the shortlist for any GLAAD awards, and it's not the bastion of non-binary or queer representation that Goodbye Volcano High looks to be. But there have been a few people in my life who have made the intensely personal decision to detransition, and while I think Snoot Game handled some aspects of this incredibly clumsily, I think that Fang/Lucy's arc in the story still taps into facets of queer reality that will make someone feel seen, and I think that makes Snoot Game uniquely valuable. I don't know. I've been trying to think of other stuff that I can say about this, but I think the fact that I'm not sure what more I could say is probably a sign that there isn't anything more I should say. So I'll leave you with this. Ultimately, folk are entitled to feel however they feel about it, but I would encourage them to play the game themselves and to draw their own conclusions. You know, like how some people didn't. Anyway, one thing that I think also weaves into Fang and Anon's storyline is the idea of forgiving yourself and moving forward. They both have things that they've done and that they've had done to them that they find hard to reconcile, and they both find a way to do so in the true ending with each other's support. At the risk of sounding schmaltzy, I really liked that part of their journey. It felt really fulfilling to watch unfold, and it made crossing the finish line of the true ending really nice. But we could all use a little self-forgiveness. We could all use a little redemption. And if we can't find it in ourselves, maybe, if we're lucky, we can find it in each other. We're not the only people in the world after all. In case I need to spell it out for you, I like Snoot Game an awful lot. It's a love story. It's a love letter. It's a discussion about how people can't really grow up or develop in a vacuum. It's a reminder that we have to have a modicum of community in order to be our best selves, that finding and maintaining community can be a challenging and messy affair, but to eschew it is to do a speed run down a path of stagnation and emotional decay. As I've said before, until the release of Goodbye Volcano High, I'm forced to fundamentally disagree with the idea that Cavemanon beat co-op to the punch on their own game. However, I do believe the fact that there are people who do think that is a sign that there is an undeniable love for the characters in the world that Cavemanon Games has created, and a lot of it. It's a love I'm happy and frankly very grateful that I got to know for myself. It's a love I hope, by making this video, I've encouraged someone new to discover for themselves. I don't like the idea that enjoying Snoot Game and being excited to play Goodbye Volcano High should be mutually exclusive positions, but I do know that the love people have for a project that runs so closely parallel to the actual game will present a unique challenge that Goodbye Volcano High will face during its development and after its release date. Comparisons are going to be inevitable. I'm probably going to draw a couple when I play Goodbye Volcano High myself, but I'm determined to keep an open mind. Because I think I'm always going to remember that day, where I found myself tossing and turning, that followed a night where I slept like crap, when I decided to watch the trailer for Goodbye Volcano High, and I thought what I thought when I saw it years ago. That project carries the spark of something truly special, and I'm really excited to play it. And a lot of things have changed in the past couple of years, but that's remained the same. Thank you very much for watching.